She stripped a stranger to save him. The next day he showed up as a CEO and asked to marry her. Hey there, lovely soul. Welcome back to Noah's Stories. Have you ever saved someone only to realize they might end up saving you too? Tonight we'll follow Claire, a nurse with a quiet heart, and the rainy night that changed everything. A story of healing, trust, and the kind of love that finds you when you least expect it. The cold autumn rain blanketed Portland like a shroud that evening. Streetlights flickered against the glistening pavement, their glow reflecting off wet asphalt. The sound of raindrops tapped a steady rhythm, as if echoing the silence inside one woman's heart. Claire Bennett, 28 years old, a nurse at Portland Mercy Hospital, walked alone beneath the storm. Her 14-hour shift had ended just moments before, and she was drained, body and soul. Her dark hair clung to her face, her thin coat soaked through, but Claire barely noticed. Every step she took felt heavy, not because of the weather, but because of life itself. A life that had taught her loss far too early. She had lost her mother at 21 to a cruel, lingering illness that hollowed her from the inside out. The man she once loved deeply had left her when she was most broken, disappearing without a word. Since then, Claire had poured every last piece of herself into her work, into saving others, because she couldn't save the ones who mattered most. As she crossed a quiet side street, a sudden screech sliced through the rain. Claire froze. Her heart leapt into her throat. Headlights flashed through the darkness, followed by the deafening crash of metal against metal. A car had lost control, slamming into a street lamp just yards away from where she stood. Without thinking, Claire ran. Water splashed under her sneakers as she raced toward the mangled vehicle. Steam hissed from the crumpled hood. The driver's side door hung open, swaying slightly. Inside, a man was slumped over the wheel, his head at an unnatural angle, blood trailing from a gash on his forehead. Claire's heart thundered, but her hands were steady, trained. She dropped to her knees beside the door, quickly checking for signs of life. His breathing was shallow, lips barely parting with each wheeze. She tore open his soaked white shirt, exposing a bruised chest, likely fractured ribs. She slipped off her coat and pressed it against his torso, using the sleeves to hold it firm. "Hold on," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "Don't die. Not tonight. I can't lose anyone else." The blood mixed with rain, seeping between her fingers. She fumbled for her phone, slippery with water and red, dialing 911. "There's been an accident on Hawthorne. Male victim, unconscious, possible chest trauma. Send an ambulance. Now." His eyelids fluttered open, barely. Brown eyes dazed and unfocused met hers. For a moment, time stopped. His lips parted, voice no louder than the wind. "Thank you, Angel." Then, he slipped into unconsciousness. Claire clenched her jaw, pressing down harder, willing him to stay alive. "Don't give up," she murmured. The rain poured heavier, but the sound of distant sirens slowly crept in, hope chasing the storm. The sound of the ambulance faded into the night, swallowed by the rain and the silence of Portland's empty streets. Claire stood still, soaked to the bone, her hands stained with a stranger's blood. She didn't know his name, didn't know if he'd survive, but she remembered the way he'd looked at her, that fleeting, fragile moment when he called her Angel. Back in her small apartment, she peeled off her wet clothes and collapsed onto the worn-out couch. The room was dim and cold, but what chilled her most was the hollow ache in her chest. This should have been just another emergency, another patient, but somehow, it wasn't. Maybe it was because, for the first time in years, someone had looked at her like she mattered, like she was the only thing standing between life and death. At Portland Mercy Hospital the next morning, Liam Hayes opened his eyes to pale light and the steady beeping of machines. His body throbbed, pain radiating from every rib, but it wasn't the injury that kept his mind racing. It was her, the woman in the rain. He couldn't remember her face clearly, but her eyes, he remembered those, full of fear but steady. Her voice, soft, calm, telling him not to give up. And then, as darkness crept in, he had called her Angel. When Naomi, his assistant, entered the room with her laptop in hand, Liam didn't hesitate. "Find her." Naomi blinked, Who? The woman who saved me. She called for help, kept me alive, then disappeared. Naomi sat down, tapping her keyboard. Police said a woman called 911 from the crash site. She performed first aid and left before paramedics arrived. No name, no ID, probably just a passerby. No, Liam said, shaking his head. She's not just anything. I don't know why, but I have to see her again. Naomi hesitated, but she knew better than to argue. With his authority as CEO, she quickly accessed the emergency call records from the night before. There were 3 calls near the accident location. The first came from a number registered to Claire Bennett. A quick search revealed her file, night shift nurse, employed at Portland Mercy. She was here, right now. Meanwhile, on a lower floor, Claire had just started her morning shift. She tied her hair back, tucked her ID badge into her pocket, and tried to silence the memory that had haunted her all night. The stranger in the rain. His broken voice, the way his hand twitched in hers. It was just another emergency, she whispered to herself. But her heart didn't believe it. Just as she stepped out of the locker room, a fellow nurse handed her a small white envelope. Someone left this for you at the front desk. Claire opened it slowly, her breath catching. Inside was a neatly folded note. Thank you for saving me. Meet me at the horizon, 6 p.m. Tucked inside was a white rose, its petals soft and still damp, carrying a faint, familiar scent. Claire stood frozen in the hallway, her heart pounding. She stared at it, fingers tightening slightly around the stem. Her heart pounded in her chest. Was it him? How did he find her? She didn't know, but part of her, maybe the part that had cried in the rain, wanted to find out. As the evening settled over Portland, the warm golden lights of the Horizon restaurant shimmered through tall glass windows, reflecting the soft glow of a city drifting into dusk. Claire stepped off the bus, her flat soaked from the rain, still clutching the note in her hand, the note that led her here. She wore the only black dress she owned, a modest piece from a long-forgotten date, and tonight, it wasn't about romance. It was about closure or curiosity. Inside, the restaurant glowed with soft jazz and low conversation, a world apart from the one she belonged to. A hostess greeted her with a polite smile. "Are you here to meet Mr. Hayes?" Claire nodded, holding up the note. The hostess gave a small nod and gestured for her to follow. They walked to a private corner where a man stood as she approached. Liam. There was no blood now, no rain, just a man in a crisp, tailored suit, with a faint bruise along his cheekbone and eyes she immediately recognized. It was him, the man from that stormy night. He smiled, voice low and sincere. "It's you, the one who saved me." Claire stood still for a beat, then nodded. "I was just doing what any nurse would have done." "No," he said gently, shaking his head. "Not everyone would kneel in the middle of a storm for a stranger." She sat down cautiously, her guard up. "Why am I here?" Liam took a breath, suddenly serious. "I have a proposal, and yes, it's going to sound insane." Claire crossed her arms. "I'm listening." "My mother started a charity fund," he began, "for people who can't afford medical care, but when she passed, she left a condition. I must marry someone good, kind, before I turn 33, or the fund dissolves." She frowned. "And your birthday is?" "In 3 months," Liam said. "I'm not asking for a real marriage, just someone willing to play the part of my fiancé, and after what happened that night, I knew you were the one." Claire narrowed her eyes. "Why me? You don't know anything about me." He smiled, softer this time, less like a CEO, more like a man holding on to hope. "I know you stayed. You didn't ask for thanks or recognition. My mother believed in people like that. So do I." Claire glanced out the window. The city lights shimmered as rain misted against the glass. Her instincts screamed to leave, but then Liam said, "If you agree, I'll fund a free clinic. Your clinic. No strings, your vision, your rules." Her breath caught. "How do you know?" "Because someone who kneels in the rain to save a stranger doesn't want applause. They want purpose." She was quiet for a long time. Then, with measured calm, she replied, 3 months. That's it. This is a deal, not a love story. Liam nodded, extending his hand. 3 months, a deal, but the kind that just might change everything. Claire shook his hand. His was warm. Hers trembled. Claire's hand trembled slightly as she let go of Liam's after their handshake. A deal. 3 months. A role crafted from a rainy night and a dying man's whispered gratitude. Yet the moment their hands parted, something in the air changed. Neither of them said it aloud, but both understood. Some feelings could never be fully contained. 3 days later, Claire left her small apartment with a single suitcase. Liam arrived in a sleek black car, opened the door for her, and lifted the suitcase himself like a man escorting his real partner. The estate appeared through the misty drizzle, perched on a Portland hillside, modern, immaculate, too perfect. It wasn't home. It was another universe. Inside, everything was quiet, too clean, too calculated. Her guest room was twice the size of her old apartment. She unpacked silently, placed a few worn outfits into the closet, then sat on the edge of the bed. She took off the silver ring Liam had given her, then slid it back on. It was just a prop, but somehow it felt heavier than it should. 2 nights later, they attended their first public event together, a fundraising gala. Liam had sent up an emerald silk dress and a velvet box containing a diamond ring. Claire stared at them, then at herself in the mirror. It all felt borrowed, temporary, but she went. At the event, Liam's hand rested lightly on her back. He moved through the crowd like he belonged, flashing that effortless smile. "This is Claire," he told people. "My fiancée. She changed everything." Claire nodded, smiled, answered every question with grace. "We met in the rain. He needed help. I was there." Out on the balcony afterward, with the city twinkling beneath a soft drizzle, Claire murmured, "I don't like lying." Liam was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Neither do I, but sometimes a necessary lie can lead to something real." In the days that followed, the line blurred. They ate breakfast, they shared dinner, the silences became comfortable. Claire told him about her mother, how she died waiting for insurance to approve treatment. Liam listened, then spoke of his own mother, how she made his father, a billionaire, promise to build a hospital for the poor before agreeing to marry him. They visited the construction site together. Liam pointed to the emergency wing, the pediatric unit. Claire looked at a smaller corner. "That could be my clinic, just a few rooms. But enough to matter." He nodded. Another day, he brought her to a storage unit. From a small wooden box, he lifted a silver necklace engraved with hope. "She wore this every day," he said. "Now, it's yours." Claire clutched it like something sacred. That night, she stood before the mirror, touching the pendant. The word hope pulsed softly with her heartbeat. On a rainy evening, passing by the study, she saw Liam still hunched over blueprints. She placed a cup of tea beside him. "You're still up?" "Too much to finish." She sat opposite him. "You don't have to do it all alone." He looked up. "I'm starting to realize that." From then on, it became harder to tell where the act ended and the truth began. One night, she cried, missing her mom. Liam entered, said nothing, just sat down, pulled her into his arms, and held her. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered. And in that moment, Claire believed him. Winter rain continued to fall over Portland, cloaking the city in a thick gray layer. But inside the hilltop estate, life between Claire and Liam carried on like a long, quiet play. They had dinner together every night, attended fundraisers, worked at the hospital construction site, and played the roles of an engaged couple. But both of them knew, deep inside, that the feelings were no longer just an act. Claire found herself beginning to trust Liam, not just as the man she had once saved, but as someone helping her rebuild a long-lost dream. He listened, shared, and stood by her in her quietest moments. And Liam, too, started to see Claire not as a solution to a legal problem, but as someone who reminded him of his mother, of the kindness he had once forgotten in a life full of calculation. But everything started to crack at the biggest charity gala of the year. Claire walked into the ballroom in a radiant red dress, her wrist adorned with the silver bracelet Liam had given her, the hope necklace shining gently at her collarbone. Liam stood beside her, elegant and composed. They walked together like the perfect couple, until the past returned, dressed in a wrinkled suit and wearing a dangerous smile. Mark, Claire's ex-boyfriend. He stood by the bar, eyes locked on her like an old wound that never healed. As Claire passed, he leaned in slightly and whispered, full of sarcasm, "Didn't expect you to choose him." Claire froze. "Mark? What are you doing here?" "I used to be CFO at his company, until he tossed me aside," Mark said coldly, glancing toward Liam, who was busy talking with a guest nearby. "He always has a plan, and you're just a part of it." Claire stayed calm, but her heart began to waver. "You can say whatever you want. What's between us is over." "Sure," Mark shrugged, then quietly pulled out an envelope from his coat pocket. "But if you really want to know who he is, open this." Claire didn't take it, but 2 days later, when she returned home after a long hospital shift, the same kind of envelope was sitting on the kitchen counter of the estate. No name, no message, just one line, written by hand, "If you still want the truth." Inside were several documents, photos of Liam meeting with a strange man, papers being exchanged, printed emails discussing legal restructuring of the fund and redirecting funding after the marriage. There were also bank statements showing large transfers from accounts tied to the fund to offshore banks. Claire's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. Her heartbeat thundered like the storm outside. Every photo, every word. So precise, so damning. She wanted it to be fake. She needed it to be fake. But the weight of doubt was heavier than hope. Liam walked in shortly after, seeing Claire frozen at the table with a stack of documents in her hands. He immediately sensed something was wrong. "Claire, what's going on?" She looked up and held the envelope toward him. Her voice was low and cold. "Explain this." He took it, scanned the contents, and his eyes darkened. "These are fake. Mark made them." "You're lying," she said, her voice cracking, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't want to believe him, Liam. But everything, it's all here." Liam stepped closer, trying to stay calm. "I didn't do anything wrong. Not a single cent was misused. Everything I've done has been for the hospital, for my mother, for you." "For me?" she scoffed. "Then why did I have to hear it from Mark? Why didn't you say anything from the beginning?" "Because I didn't think it mattered anymore. I thought we were past the deal." "But I've always just been part of your plan, haven't I?" Silence. No denial, no apology, just a growing distance between them. Claire slowly took off the engagement ring and placed it on the table between them. Her voice broke as she said, "I trusted you with the pieces I had left, and now I'm not sure I even have those anymore." Liam reached out, desperation flickering in his eyes, but she stepped back, trembling. "Don't, please, don't make this harder." She walked away. The door closed behind her like a blade slicing through Liam's chest. That night, Portland rained again. Liam called Naomi, his voice falling into emptiness. "Mark is behind everything. He's destroying everything." Naomi answered quickly, "I'm already investigating, but you need to tell Claire the truth, now." "It's too late," Liam murmured, then gripped his car keys and rushed out into the rain, searching for her, like he had once done, like it was instinct. Elsewhere in the city, Claire sat huddled at a bus stop, clutching the documents to her chest. Inside her, a storm raged. Half of her believed Mark was lying again. The other half feared Liam had never told the truth. She hadn't even called him yet when headlights suddenly flashed across the wet road. Tires screeched. Metal clashed. Glass shattered. She turned instantly. That car, it was Liam's. Without thinking, Claire ran through the rain. She screamed his name. Blood, smoke, shallow breaths. She dropped to her knees beside him, shaking and crying. "No, Liam, don't die. Not you. Not now." The rain kept pouring as the ambulance pulled up to the hospital entrance. Claire sat beside Liam on the stretcher, her hand gripping his like he'd vanish the moment she let go. His face was pale, blood from the wound on his temple mixing with the rain, trickling down like a slow, icy current. She leaned in, her voice trembling as she whispered, "I'm here, Liam. I'm not leaving again." When the ER doors shut behind them, Claire remained frozen in the hallway, soaked from head to toe, her body trembling. Minutes later, Naomi rushed in, phone in hand, her face drawn with urgency. She barely caught her breath before saying, "It was Mark. He hired someone to crash Liam's car." Claire spun around, stunned, but Naomi wasn't finished. "He forged everything too. The photos, the emails, the bank statements, everything you saw was fake. His goal was to break you two apart." Claire's heart sank. Each word hit like a blade. She remembered the way Liam reached for her as she walked away, remembered how she left him alone in the storm. And now, he was in the ER. Partly because she didn't believe in him. Hours passed like a lifetime. When the ER doors finally opened, a doctor stepped out, pulling off his mask with a calm expression. "He's stable," he said. "Mild head trauma and some fractured ribs. He's going to be fine. You can see him now." Claire didn't hesitate. She stepped into the room, her heart pounding. The room was quiet, the beeping of monitors the only sound. Liam lay still, breathing steadily. As she approached, he opened his eyes slowly. "You're still here?" he asked, voice rough but gentle. Claire nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks as she grabbed his hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I doubted you. I walked away." Liam gave her a faint smile and gently squeezed her hand. "You had every reason to doubt. I don't blame you." "But you almost died," she choked out. "Because of me." "I'm alive because of you," he said. "I had to find you. I couldn't let you go." Just then, Naomi walked in holding her tablet. "Mark's been arrested," she announced. "He confessed about the crash, the forged documents, the stolen funds. The police have all the proof they need." Claire turned to Liam. His eyes stayed on her, calm and kind. "The hospital's still happening," he said. "The fund's safe. And your clinic? I'm still keeping that promise." Claire blinked back tears. "You didn't do all this just for your mom, did you?" "No," Liam replied softly. "For her, for your mom, and for you." The next morning was Liam's 33rd birthday. A nurse brought in a small cake with a single candle. Naomi stood in the doorway smiling as Claire lit the candle. "Make a wish," she said gently. Liam looked at Claire and quietly replied, "Already did," before blowing it out. Later, when they were alone, Liam slowly pushed himself upright, wincing from the pain, but his voice steady. "I need to tell you something," he said. "This started as a deal, but now, I don't want it to end. Not with you." Claire froze, her heart in her throat. "You still want this? After everything?" "I'll wait," Liam said. "As long as you're here, I'll wait." Claire smiled, her fingers brushing the hope pendant around her neck. "I've been scared, but the night you called me an angel, I started falling for you. I just couldn't admit it." Liam took her hand and placed it over his chest. "You don't have to be scared anymore." Claire leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "As long as we're honest, I won't walk away again." Liam was discharged from the hospital 10 days after the accident. He still moved slowly, leaning on a cane, but the light had returned to his face. Claire stood waiting at the entrance, a gentle breeze tugging at her hair, carrying the calm after the storm. She opened the car door for him. He settled into the seat, then turned to her, eyes soft. "Let's go home," she said quietly, the first time she ever called it that. From that day forward, Claire was no longer a guest in the hilltop house. She moved into Liam's room. There was no longer a reason to pretend. They cooked together, watched movies late into the night, and filled the quiet evenings with simple things, holding hands, shared silence. The kind that meant everything. Together, they finalized the last details of the hospital project. Claire coordinated with medical staff and patient outreach. Liam handled finance and public relations. Mornings began with coffee and planning at the kitchen table. Occasionally, they bickered over minor details, but always ended with laughter. One early spring afternoon, Liam drove Claire out to an open lot about 20 minutes from downtown. It was peaceful, surrounded by trees and open sky. "This is yours," he said, handing her a simple set of papers. She looked down, then back at him, barely breathing. "Your clinic," he added. "Carter Free Clinic. Construction starts next week." Claire hugged the papers to her chest, her voice trembling. "You really did it." Liam nodded. "I promised, and I keep my promises." They stood there, in the middle of that bare land, already imagining children being healed, mothers being saved, people once hopeless now finding help. A few weeks later, Claire returned to the hospital site. The building was nearly finished, white walls gleaming in the sunlight. Liam walked beside her, still with a cane, but with a fire in his eyes like the very first day. They wandered through the ER wing, the pediatric unit, the waiting room. Claire ran her fingers along a freshly painted wall, eyes misty. "I used to think I'd never touch my dream," she whispered. "But now, it's here, all around me, touching me back." Liam said nothing. He just took her hand and squeezed. One day, he brought her to a small city park where his mother used to take him as a boy. On a wooden bench carved into the backrest were the words, "Hope begins where someone dares to care." Claire sat down, fingers intertwined with his. "Do you think we're brave enough to keep going?" Liam nodded. "Not just brave. We've been hurt enough to understand, and loved enough to heal." That night, under the soft yellow glow of the reading lamps, they sat by the window, watching spring rain tap gently against the glass. Claire leaned her head on Liam's shoulder, her heart finally light. "I never thought I'd have a life like this," she whispered. "You deserve it," Liam replied, "and more." As spring edged closer and the final coats of paint dried across the hospital walls, everything they had dreamed was no longer just a blueprint. It was real, tangible, waiting to open its doors to the world. That morning, the sun rose bright over Portland, as if the city itself was ready to start again. Claire stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of her white blouse. She wasn't going to the hospital for a shift today. Today wasn't about routine. Today was about everything they'd built together. From downstairs, Liam's voice rang up. "The car's here, Nurse Carter." She laughed. "Still not a doctor, Mr. Hayes." "Not yet," he replied. When they arrived, the plaza outside the new hospital was already bustling. It all felt surreal, the polished glass walls, the crowd lining up with excitement, the banners fluttering above that read, "Sullivan Mercy Hospital Grand Opening." Liam no longer needed his cane, but he gently squeezed Claire's hand as if to remind himself he wasn't walking alone anymore. "Do you remember our first visit here?" he asked softly. Claire nodded. It was all steel beams and mud. "And now," Liam glanced around, voice filled with awe, "it's everything my mother ever dreamed of, and everything you helped me see clearly." The ceremony began. Liam stepped onto the stage and addressed the crowd. "Today, we're not just opening a building," he began. "We're raising a symbol of belief, of second chances. My mother used to say no one should be denied care because of what they didn't have, and if she were here today, she'd know it was the woman who pulled me from the wreckage who made this real." He turned toward Claire. His gaze said everything. Claire stepped forward and took the mic. "I'm not standing here because of luck," she said. "I'm here because I once lost my mother in a hospital hallway, waiting, hoping. But today, there are doors that won't close. Not to anyone. Not anymore." After thunderous applause, they cut the red ribbon together. Flashbulbs popped, cheers rose. Claire looked at Liam, and nothing more needed to be said. Their smile said it all. A month later, a new sign was placed in front of a modest brick building on Portland's south side. Carter Free Clinic. In memory of Margaret Carter, who believed healing was not a privilege. Claire stood quietly in front of it for a long time. She didn't cry, but her eyes shone as Liam stepped behind her and rested a hand on her shoulder. "How long have you dreamed of this?" he asked gently. "So long," she said. "I forgot when the dream began." They walked inside, no marble floors, no grandeur, just warmth. A young mother holding her baby was greeted by a nurse. A middle-aged man filled out paperwork for a free checkup. A space built not on wealth, but on the belief that everyone deserves to be cared for. That evening, they sat on their balcony overlooking the city. In the distance, the hospital glowed like a lighthouse against the soft night. "I used to think love was a prize for people who had it all figured out," Liam said. "But you showed me it's for the ones who've been broken and dared to heal." Claire leaned into him, her voice a whisper. "And it's the one thing worth holding on to, after everything else." Under the quiet stars and the light of their shared work, they hadn't just rebuilt a dream. They had rebuilt each other, with love, with trust, and with a new beginning. And maybe, just maybe, this was only the beginning of something even greater. Weeks passed, filled with quiet routines, healing days, and long walks beneath spring blossoms. Until one morning, Claire found an envelope by her bedside. Inside, a handwritten note. "Let's stop pretending. Let's make this real. Meet me on the hill. I'll be waiting." The late afternoon sun bathed the Portland hillside in gold, casting soft light over the garden behind the estate. The same hill where two lost souls once met in a storm now bore witness to something quieter, stronger, a promise made with no conditions. Claire stood in front of the mirror upstairs in the home that had once felt too grand, too cold. Now it was hers and Liam's. The simple white dress hugged her figure gently, elegant in its quiet grace. Around her neck, she still wore the silver pendant that read "Hope," glinting softly against her skin. Outside, the faint sound of music drifted up from the garden. It was nothing like the grand weddings in magazines. No grand arches, no rows of roses. Just a green lawn, a few rows of rustic wooden chairs, twinkling lights strung between the trees, and the city skyline glowing in the distance. Naomi entered the room holding a bouquet of white wildflowers. "Ready?" she asked, smiling warmly. Claire nodded, her voice soft. "More than ever." Down below, Liam waited. His suit was slate gray, tailored but simple, his posture tall but calm. He no longer needed a cane, yet when he looked toward the garden's entrance, his hands trembled slightly. He'd never believed in fate, until one rainy night changed everything. When Claire appeared, silence rippled through the small gathering. The setting sun caught her hair, made her eyes glow. Her steps were slow, certain, like each one etched a line deeper into his heart. She reached him. No longer a stranger, no longer a question, but an answer. There was no elaborate ceremony, no priests or rituals, just a close friend officiating, a circle of people who mattered, and two people who had survived everything to get here. "Claire Bennett," Liam began, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "From the moment you pulled me back from the edge of death, I knew you weren't just someone who saved me. You were someone who made me want to be saved." Claire's lips curved, her eyes shimmering with tears. "Liam Hayes," she replied, "I lost so much. My mother, my trust, my sense of home. But you never asked me to be strong. You just stood with me while I remembered how. So today I choose you. Not because I need saving, but because you remind me that I'm worth saving." Naomi handed them the rings. Liam gently slid a silver band onto her finger. Not large or flashy, but familiar, like the first time their hands met in the rain. Their kiss was soft, not the beginning of a fairy tale, but a quiet vow to keep writing the truth, together. Evening fell like a hush, cool air dancing between lantern lights. The reception was filled with soft guitar melodies, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Friends from the hospital, staff from the clinic, a few neighbors, all gathered not to celebrate extravagance, but endurance. A young mother who had once been treated at the Carter Free Clinic stepped forward with her baby in one arm and a bouquet of hand-picked wildflowers in the other. She pressed them into Claire's hands, eyes filled with gratitude. Claire hugged her tightly, tears catching in her lashes. From a distance, Liam watched, his heart swelling with something beyond love, purpose. Later that night, long after the guests had gone and the music had faded, Claire and Liam remained under the stars, wrapped in a blanket of silence and moonlight. Claire leaned against his shoulder. "Do you think we deserved this ending?" she whispered. Liam tightened his hand around hers. "Not because we were perfect," he said, "but because we didn't give up." Claire smiled, and because we still believed in kindness, even after we'd been broken by it. The next morning, while Portland still slept, the newlyweds left the estate, not for some lavish honeymoon, but for the modest clinic nestled at the foot of the hill. A line of patients already waited outside its doors. Claire stepped out of the car first, her hands still entwined with Liam's. She looked at him, eyes bright with the early light. "Time to start married life," she said with a grin. Liam laughed, "With my angel in scrubs?" As the clinic doors closed behind them, the morning sun caught the glint of her hope pendant and the silver band on her finger, two quiet promises, shining into everything yet to come.